state supervisor at Oxford, Professor Gilbert Rye. Thinking and meaning are the same kinds of thing, but they're not the same type of thing, because kinds and types are different sorts of things, even though they're alike in nature, since sorts and natures, though similar in character, differ in dimension, because characters and dimensions, though akin to one another in form, are contrasting in significance. There's a distinction between nature and character, and there's a distinction between character and significance. But the difference between nature and character is a different kind of difference from the difference between character and difference. But it's also the same kind of difference. Thinking that if a different kind of difference is different from the same kind of difference, then it can't also be the same, is being caught up in some ancient prejudice and being unable to think blah, 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 blah.
My name is Ben Burgis, and this is Give Them an Argument. In just a moment, I am going to be speaking to the libertarian commentator and economist, Walter Block. And then later in the show, I'm going to be chatting with the comedian and podcaster, Mike Racine. The voice you just heard was the late, great Marxist analytic philosopher, G.A. Cohen, Jerry Cohen, and that is a ancient home video of him that has always made me laugh. He is the voice you just heard was the late, great Marxist analytic philosopher, G.A. Cohen, Jerry Cohen, and that is a ancient home video of him that's always made me laugh, where he is gently mocking his dissertation advisor, Gilbert Ryle. And of course, part of why it's funny is that people who come from the sort of academic background that I do, analytic philosophy, do really sometimes sound like that, to me too. And sometimes, it can seem, very esoteric, very useless. And while I would defend the value of studying, esoteric things that don't have immediate application, just as part of, a general program of, human flourishing. I want a society where everyone has time to contemplate interesting abstract subjects. It does also make you really appreciate people who come out of that background and who are able to take the analytic rigor of that background and use it to write things that are clear and accessible and immediately politically useful. And the reason I bring all this up is because as I'm recording this, we just heard about the death of Judith Jarvis Thomson, who was very old. She was born in 1929. She died this last Friday. And if you don't know who that is, right? If you don't know who Judith Jarvis Thomson is, or why I'm talking about her at the beginning of this episode, Judith Jarvis Thomson. Well, one, if you've ever heard of the trolley problem, then even if you've never heard of her, you've received the ripple effects of her work. So the trolley problem was something that was originally one example out of, I think, literally dozens of examples that was sort of made in passing to make a totally unrelated point in an old paper by Philippa Foot. But then Thomson is the one who sort of picked it up, gave it the form that we know now, called it the trolley problem, and really started wrestling with it in an interesting way. And the idea that there's a problem about it, that it's not just obvious what you should do in these situations, is all Thomson. If you have heard her name, it's most likely if you went to college and you took an ethics class, there's like a 95% chance that you were assigned her classic paper, In Defense of Abortion, which is, I believe, by a long shot, certainly in terms of, maybe if we're talking about like extracts from things written by Kant or Descartes or something, it's different, but certainly in terms of articles that were published in philosophy journals in the 20th century, In Defense of Abortion by Judith Jarvis Thomson is by far and away, by a landslide, the most widely read thing that there is in academic philosophy, certainly in terms of it being included in lots of different anthologies, assigned in lots of different classes. Everybody reads that thing when you talk about abortion rights in an ethics class. And it really embodies all of those virtues that I was just talking about. In my book, Give Them an Argument, that you can see behind me if you're watching this on YouTube. I talk about that paper in the chapter on poor unfortunate Ben Shapiro, and there's a reason for that, right? Because when I say I give them an argument, what I have in mind, one of the sort of basic models of what I have in mind is what Judith Jarvis Thomson did, because that paper is incredibly logically rigorous in terms of following all the threads of argument and counter argument and objections and responses and teasing out all the differences between different things that you could say. It's not dumbed down in any way, shape, or form. It's actually the sort of thing that makes academic philosophers really grapple with what she's saying. And in terms of her defense of abortion rights, not on the basis of making any sort of metaphysical claim about whether a fetus is a person or not yet, but on the basis of everybody's right to control their own body. But also, despite being so rigorous and philosophically interesting, it's incredibly clearly written. If you can read that paper. And she's also just a flat out really good writer. She is always very clear. She's very charming. She's never boring. So if you want to be an academic philosopher and make yourself useful to the world at large, really, I think that's one of the models that you should take. I mean, she's somebody who I've been reading and thinking about, her work on a few different subjects for almost half of my life, literally. I'm 40 now, and I think the first one of her papers I read was like 16 years ago, maybe. And I think that certainly in terms of what I'm trying to do with this show, doing things like debating libertarians, which I'm about to do with Professor Walter Block, and in terms of what I tried to do in my first book and what I often try to do in Jacobin articles, again, I mean, she's really one of the models I try to emulate. Judith Jarvis Thomson, rest in power. I am now joined by Professor Walter Block. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this. I know that in our email exchange before this, you said that it was important to the give each other time to talk without interruption and try to have approximately equal time. So I think in the interest of that, when we get into this, we can treat it like we're playing chess in the park, with a with a little clock in between. I will set a little timer both when I speak and when you speak. So if you want to, if you've only got 30 seconds of stuff to say, that's cool, right? Like, which might sometimes be the case, answer a question or something. But if but otherwise, I'll just do that to make sure that that I don't like cut you off if you haven't been speaking for let's say 4 minutes at a time. So. But before we get to all that, right, before we actually start arguing with each other, when I mentioned that I was having you on, somebody on social media showed me a video that with a piece of biographical information about you, which I thought was surprising and kind of funny, which is that there's a video where you talked about your own political journey from, I think, originally considering yourself to be some sort of socialist to your current libertarian views, and at the beginning of that journey, actually high school friends with one Sanders.
That's true. But before I get on that, if you don't mind, I'd like to just make a comment on Judith Jarvis Thomson.
Yes.
I share everything you said, and maybe W or whatever. She is a magnificent writer, very incisive, very keen. The only thing I disagree with you about is you said she was very old when she died. She's younger than if she was born in 49, I was born in 41. I'm sorry?
1929.
Oh, 29. I heard 49. And I was
No.
Wow, 29. So she was very elderly. I was born in 41. But apart from that, you know, she reminds me a little bit of Ronald Coase. Ronald Coase won a Nobel Prize. He didn't write that much. Judith Jarvis Thomson didn't write that much. But the article that he wrote on social costs, that is Coase, was the most highly cited article in any article in economics. And in economics, and I'm sure in philosophy in your field, it's good to be in prestigious journals and have a good book, but citation indices are very important. And Judith Jarvis Thomson, I mean, as you said, if you take any philosophy course that has anything to do with ethics, you gotta come across her somewhere. So I applaud your analysis or comments about her. I agree with you 100%. I disagree with her. I'm not either pro-life or pro-choice. I'm an evictionist, which is a different view than either pro-life or pro-choice. And I have criticized her on that, but I still support your assessment of her. Just exquisitely brilliant.
Yeah. So it's not what we're going to talk about, but just out of curiosity, do you want to take just a minute to explain what that middle position is?
Okay, well, you know, in libertarians are very divided on the issue of abortion. Ron Paul is totally pro-life. Murray Rothbard is pro-choice, and you can't get two more famous libertarians than Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard, and I think they're both wrong. You know, the joke is if you get 10 libertarians, you ask a question, you'll get 25 answers. So we diverge on that. My view, I call it evictionism, is I start with the view that the fertilized egg is a human being, a very young human being, but a human being. But he is a trespasser. And take the case of rape. A woman is walking down the street, she gets grabbed, she gets impregnated, and now there's this person growing inside of her. That person is a trespasser, and she has the right to evict, but not to kill. Because you don't kill innocent trespassers, you just evict them. Now, in the first 6 months or the first 2 trimesters, it doesn't matter. If you evict with modern technology, the person will die. But in the 3rd trimester, the baby is viable outside of the womb, and therefore you're only allowed to evict but not kill. Whereas the pro-choice people say you have a right to evict and kill, whereas the pro-life people say you have no right to evict or kill. So I'm a moderate. That's why they call me Walter Moderate Block. I take a moderate position between the pro-choice and the pro-life position.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think that I actually did a debate with a pro-life activist, Kay Fellows, a few weeks ago, where this issue came up, and I think that what to say about that viability issue is a little bit complicated, because I think what viability means isn't always clear cut. If you have to take like medically heroic measures to keep a fetus alive, I think that's a little bit different from saying that you could you could have separation, you know, without killing, and then they would just be fine. But I guess I did want to, you know, since the last time I had a libertarian on here, we were talking about very like you know, nitty gritty policy stuff, which is always good. But because I know you have very strong views about this, I thought it might be fun to sort of pull back and talk about the much bigger picture, right? You know, sort of more fundamental assumptions. So I was wondering if maybe we could start by you sort of outlining your views about well, I was about to say the legitimate role of government, but you're an anarcho-capitalist. You don't think that there is a legitimate role for government. But so your views about non-aggression and why and property rights and why from those sort of basic starting points you end up at libertarianism.
Right, but before I do that, again, I just wanted to mention a word about Bernie Sanders since you brought him up.
Oh yeah, please, yes. Sorry, I forgot, but yes, that's okay. Please do. Yes.
All geniuses are absent-minded. You're absent-minded, therefore you're a genius. I'm just kidding. But,
Not sure that follows, but I like it. All right, go on, go for it.
Bernie Sanders and I were buddies, and I have to tell you my Bernie Sanders joke. My
Mm.
Bernie Sanders joke is that Bernie Sanders runs away from nothing. He didn't run away from socialism when it was not that popular. He even has the view that not only should ex-cons vote, but even people in prison should vote. And he doesn't run away from that, even though that's not exactly popular. But there's one person from whom he ran away, and that's me. How so? Because he was one of the best runners in the city, and we ran in the same divisions, half mile and up, half mile, 2.5 miles. And we'd start at the starting line, and then he would run away from me because he was a really good runner. So we were sort of buddies, and we've stayed together in contact every 5 or 10 years. How you doing? We agreed we have different views, but we both lived in the same quadrant away from Madison High School. So sometimes we walked to school together or back from school from home, and we were on the track team. So we'd go to Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx and we'd be together. So we were sort of buddies. He was very political in high school. I was interested in girls and sports and not politics, but I'm Jewish, I'm in Brooklyn, everyone's a socialist there, so I was a socialist. I didn't think about it, but then later on I diverged from him. But he's sort of a boyhood chum of mine, and I intend, once this COVID is over, to invite him to speak at Loyola University, because I had Ron Paul speak, and I like to have my students have many different sides. I believe in inclusion and diversity, not so much of skin color or sex or anything, but of ideas. And Bernie certainly has a different idea than Ron Paul, although not so much in foreign policy, because he and Rand Paul, Ron's son, once cooperated on some sort of bring all the troops home kind of thing. So there is an overlap. There's a Venn diagram. And there's an overlap between libertarians and lefties or progressives or socialists or whatever you want to call it. And, if Ron Paul were president, the first thing he'd do is bring home all the troops. Second thing he'd do is give a pardon to everybody in jail who was in jail for victimless crime. Okay, so now that I've done my thing on Bernie Sanders,
so I should mention, actually, before we get to this, that when your friend Bernie ran for president in 2016, not only, of course, did you not support him, but I was surprised to see on YouTube that you had a libertarian case for Donald Trump. I don't know if you felt the same way this year, or if you'd changed your mind by now.
Well, what I did with 2 other people, I started a thing called Libertarians for Trump, because I thought Hillary was, just horrible. I mean, she's an interventionist, and she's a socialist and fascist, whatever you want to call her. I didn't like her one bit, and I thought Donald was way better. On the other hand, I wanted Gary Johnson, who was running for president on the Libertarian Party ticket, to have as many votes as he could. So what I came up with, or what me and my colleagues came up with, was if you're in a red state or in a blue state, vote for Gary Johnson, because Donald either doesn't need your vote because he's going to get swamped in Massachusetts, or he doesn't need your vote because he's going to win big in Alabama. But if you're in a purple state, then Pennsylvania or Florida or whatever the purple state are, then vote for Donald, because now he needs your vote. So this was my way of trying to have our cake and eat it as well, namely support Donald vis-a-vis Hillary, but also not eschew the Libertarian Party, because we're libertarians, we want to support Libertarian Party. Okay, so now I'm finally ready to answer your question.
Okay. Sorry. Just to be clear, I do want you to do that, but I didn't quite get to. I mean, just to satisfy my idle curiosity here, did you take the same position in 2020, or had the intermediate 4 years changed your mind?
No, I was just too lazy. I didn't start it up again because I figured that Gary Johnson would get 5% of the vote. I mean, he was the governor of New Mexico, whereas Jo Jorgensen, I figured she'd get 0.25% of the vote and it really wouldn't matter. But in the event, I was wrong. And I wrote this column in the Wall Street Journal where I said, I'm hitting my head against the wall because I should have done it again. And that way, because I regard Biden as horrible. I regard him as a weather vane and sort of a Bernie Sanders type or an AOC type. And Kamala Harris, I mean, if Biden falls apart, Kamala Harris, and she's even more radical than Bernie Sanders. So I was desperately in support of Donald, but I should have made the same push, because the Libertarians did get more than the difference between the two major parties in several of the states. And look what happened in Georgia. If the Libertarians didn't have a candidate in Georgia for the Senate, Perdue would have been in the Senate right now. But he didn't make 50%, and the Libertarian candidate got like 2% or something like that. So now they're going to have a runoff, and God forbid, from my point of view, the Democrats win both. And now Kamala Harris is the deciding vote of the Senate. So I greatly regret I didn't do it again.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think, like I said, I wish that I agreed with you that that Biden was a crypto Bernie Sanders type. I'd be so much happier right now. I think, but in any case, I mean, I do get like like whatever. My preferences would be very different, but the electoral strategy makes sense to me. So, but I don't want to delay you any further. Let's do this.
Okay, well, Libertarianism, as I understand it, and as I say, you get 10 libertarians, you get 25 different views. There are two basic, well, maybe three basic foundations of libertarianism. What are they? First, the non-aggression principle. Keep your mitts to yourself. Don't be grabbing other people with their property unless you have their permission. Sadomasochism is okay because consenting adults agree. Boxing is okay because, if I punch you in the nose, but you've agreed to be in the boxing match with me, it's okay. Now, I can't bite your ear and I can't hit below the belt, but we've agreed to punch. So that's okay. So the non-aggression principle means no murder, no theft, no slavery, no, I don't know what, rape, whatever. It just rules that out. But now you need another part of the Libertarian foundation, and that is private property rights. Because I notice you have a nice shirt there. What is it, Montana? No,
Michigan State.
Michigan State. Now, suppose I grab that Michigan State shirt right off of you. Am I a criminal or not? Did I violate the non-aggression principle? Well, it all depends upon who's the rightful owner of that Michigan State shirt. If you stole it from me yesterday, which you didn't, and I grab it, well, then I'm the good guy. And if you resist me, you're the bad guy. But the fact of the matter is I never saw that shirt before. It's your shirt. And if I grab it, I'm the thief. But it's because of private property rights. Well, how do you get private property rights? We go to John Locke. You mix your labor with virgin land. You start growing corn. I domesticate a cow and I get milk. And now in Robert Nozick's terminology, another famous philosopher, any legitimate title transfer. So barter would be one. So you have corn, I have milk, we trade. Now I have the corn, even though I didn't produce it. You have the milk, even though you didn't produce that. But we can trace it to homesteading and legitimate title transfer. And any legitimate title transfer, such as buying, selling, lending, gambling, whatever. And the third plank of libertarianism is free association. Nobody should be forced to associate with anyone else against his will. I mean, the big problem with slavery and rape is that the victim is forced to associate with either the master or the rapist when they don't want to. So those would be the three planks of libertarianism. And then what are the implications? Well, no victimless crimes, economic freedom, laissez-faire capitalism, non-aggression, the U.S. is not the policeman of the world. And that would be libertarianism in 3 minutes.
All right, nice. You came in under time. So I like that you started out by acknowledging something that is very important that I think that some presentations of libertarianism maybe skip over, which is that non-aggression by itself doesn't actually get you very far, because if we have the difference between aggression and defense is who's entitled to a piece of property. So if as you say, you take the shirt off of me, well, if you're the rightful owner of the shirt, it's not aggression. if you aren't, it is. Which is very important, because I think that there's a way that I'm often frustrated by that people present libertarianism, that it's about, well, here are all the things that nobody should have to go to jail for. You know, I don't want to use force to do this or that or the other thing, but of course, a no trespassing sign is an implicit threat of force. You know, that if you trespass, I'm going to, well, certainly ask you to leave, but if you don't, then I have options that may include, calling the cops in your preferred society. That might play out differently, because there wouldn't be any, cops, but there might be.
No. There'd be cops, private cops.
Okay, so I call, so I'm threatening to call the private cops. Fair enough, right? So this is really important, because when we talk about something like redistributive taxation, that you're going to be taxed to pay for somebody else, that you're going to be taxed to pay for somebody else's healthcare, for example. If you start from the premise that other person, that other person has a right to healthcare, that's like a legitimate, that they are entitled to that, that money, that they have that it's morally right that they should have it to pay for their healthcare, rather than that you should have it in the bank account, then the non-aggression principle hasn't been violated. So what's really doing all of the work isn't the non-aggression principle, it's the underlying theory of property rights. Because I could agree with John Rawls that the right theory of entitlement is one that's based on considerations that have nothing to do with whether my property can be traced back to a just act of original acquisition, like you're talking about. I could think that the right theory of entitlement has to do with considerations like fairness, but still agree with the non-aggression principle that, sure, if you're entitled to something, then I shouldn't take it away. It's kind of tautological. So I think that the two things that I really like to pursue are, one, that question about what is the right theory of entitlement. Why should we accept this theory of property rights, that it has to that you're only entitled to something, and you are entitled to something if it can be traced back to a just act of original acquisition. We'll get to that, right? But the one that I'd really like to pursue before that is the gap between this theory and the world that we live in. Because I understand that if we lived in a world where maybe we started out with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and I just hit time, so I'll just wrap up the sentence and then throw it to you. If we start with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and their descendants spread out over the world, engaging in homesteading of unclaimed land, and then they barter with each other, or they invent money, and then eventually we get the distribution of wealth and property that we have in the world today. I understand why, if your theory is right, that would mean that everybody was entitled to what they had, and taxation would be theft and all that stuff. But of course, that's not the world that we live in at all, right? The economic history of the real world has almost no resemblance to that. So I guess that's what I'd be interested in hearing you speak to, how this grounds the rights to property that people actually have in the world as it exists right now.
Very well said. And by the way, about this timing, you don't have to really do the chess clock. I mean, if it's 60-40 or 40-60, that's okay. I just don't want it to be 90.
Well, I just wanted to make sure, because there's a concern that you raised. So,
but we're amiable. We're having a nice discussion, and we don't have to make it to the second. Okay. I think what you're saying is very valuable and very correct. With one maybe minor disagreement, when you say that it has no resemblance to that. It has a little bit of a resemblance, or how much of a resemblance we can argue about, but it's not no resemblance. It's got some resemblance. Well, now I think what we're getting into is reparations. Now let's take reparations for slavery. There's this guy Horowitz, David Horowitz.
Yeah.
David Horowitz, the second thoughts guy, who says, look, we shouldn't have any reparations to blacks for slavery because, look, none of us now ever had a slave, right? You didn't have any slaves. I didn't have any slaves. Nobody living now, at least in the United States, I don't know about what's going on in Africa, we never had slaves, nor any black people been slaves. So the whole thing is crazy, and we shouldn't have any reparations. That's one extreme view. The other extreme view is all whites owe all blacks reparations, slavery, because, we had slavery. And I'm, again, Walter Moderate Block, and I say, let's take a moderate position here. It's true that not all whites owe all blacks anything, because many blacks just came to this country 2 years ago. I'm Jewish. My parents came, my father's people came from Russia in 1880. My mother's parents came from Poland in 1902. We had nothing to do with slavery, so why do I owe anybody anything? But Horowitz starts with a proper premise that not all whites owe all blacks anything, and he concludes erroneously that no whites owe any blacks anything, and that's false. Now, what should have happened in 1865 is we should have had an ex post facto law saying slavery is a violation of rights, slight violation of rights. I'm kidding, not a slight, a very, very serious violation of rights. And what should have happened is that we would have put in jail or punished all the slave owners. And we would have taken all of their property. And I mean, let's say there were 500 slaves and there were, 20,000 acres, if I got the right numbers. Each slave gets 40 acres and a mule. That's where you got 40 acres and a mule from. Namely, you divide the plantation into 500 bits, 40 acres each, and you give a mule or whatever it is, a barn, I don't know. And we don't have to worry, I only get 10 acres, I'm a slave because it's a fertile acres, and you get 70 acres because it's not fertile. We don't have to worry about that. Just on average, everyone gets it. But what happened instead is that the slave owner kept his property, and he said to the slaves, well, there's no more slavery, goodbye, I might hire you, but I'm not giving you a penny. And right now, there's some great-great-grandson of the slave owner who lives in Mississippi. He's got that plantation, and he's innocent in the sense that he is, he didn't have slaves, but he's the holder of stolen property. Look, if that shirt, the Michigan state shirt, if your grandfather stole it from my grandfather, I want that shirt back. Because you're innocent, you didn't steal anything, but you are now the holder of stolen goods. So you should give it back to me. So my view is we should have reparations, and we should have no ex post facto laws. The Nuremberg trials established that. The Germans said we were just following orders, and we said tut tut tut, no. Putting people in concentration camps and killing them is not a real good thing, and we're going to punish you for it, even though it was legal in Germany to do that, and they were just following the law. So my answer to your question, my long-winded answer to your question is, we have to have reparations from some people to other people, but now the burden of proof is on the plaintiff. Possession is 9/10 of the law. And the further back you go in history, you go back to the Indians where there's no written language, you go back 2,000 years ago to Arabs and Jews, it's harder to prove anything. But if some black guy in Harlem can now prove that his great-grandfather was a slave in this Mississippi place, he should get, 1/200th or 1/500th of that plantation. And if there are others, they should take the whole plantation away from him. So I agree that the present distribution of property is not exactly kosher, but we libertarians believe in reparations, and we don't believe in any right to health care. We only believe in negative rights. They're only right not to be murdered, not to be stolen from, not to be raped. No right to health care. That's just wealth. No right to wealth because if I have a right to health care, you have an obligation to give it to me. Whereas if I have a right not to be murdered, you have an obligation not to murder me. If I have a right not to be raped, which I do, you have an obligation not to rape me. But if I have, I'm sorry.
I'll do my best. So I did want to jump in here. So
sure.
So I think that So I like, yeah, I mean, I understand, of course, that you only believe in negative rights. I think there are positive rights, like a right to healthcare. That doesn't mean a right to healthcare doesn't mean a right to have any particular person deliver that healthcare. What it does mean is a right to have the tab picked up by the state via progressive taxation. That's what people believe in a right to healthcare actually mean by it. So I do want to press this point about why we should believe that there are only negative rights, why we should think that the right theory of entitlement is that everybody's entitled to exactly what they end up with as a result of this process, of some process of what Robert Nozick called capitalistic acts between consenting adults, going back to some just act of original acquisition, if we live in a world where it actually happened that way. Because even if we did live in such a world, to put my cards on the table, I would still disagree with you. But I'm also curious, I do want to just spend another minute on the gap between the world that we actually live in and that one, because I get why you think that that the living descendants of slaves should have a right to get reparations from the living descendants of slave owners if the living descendants of slave owners still have wealth that's derived from the misdeeds of their ancestors. I get why you have that position, but the thing that I get a little bit less is how this idea that, okay, if that can't be proven, then everything else just stays as is comes from, because this idea that possession is 9/10 the law. I mean, that's a very useful pragmatic principle for a legal system, just trying to figure this out. But it's certainly not obvious how it flows from or even fits with the idea that what people are basically entitled to is whatever comes out of this free market process. And so to make that objection concrete, right? Because I can imagine, I'm sure you talk about this all the time. I'm sure you get where I'm going, but for anybody who's watching or listening to this who might not quite get the point, right? Let's tweak that example that you just gave about the plantation, and let's say only half of that is true, right? So let's say that it is true, or only half of it can be proven, right? So the half that can be proven is that there is some descendant of a slave owner who is still enjoying wealth that's derived from his ancestors' holding of slaves. He's still living in the old plantation house. There's been an uninterrupted family fortune over the generations. But let's say the other half doesn't exist. Either it's impossible to prove that any particular person was a descendant of a slave held on that plantation, or just for whatever reason, there just are no living descendants of the slaves who were held at that plantation. It's, if I'm hearing you right, it's also your position that the person who is currently occupying that old plantation manor and is currently enjoying that inherited stolen wealth has a right to continue in it. That it would be that if we that if that money were taxed for to provide for any of the positive rights that I believe in, that would therefore violate that person's rights. And I don't understand where that comes from on your theory, because if you say that what entitles somebody to a given piece of property is that either they did the Lockean, labor mixing, they homesteaded the piece of land themselves or whatever, or there's some sort of process of barter or sale or gambling that, by which their possession of it can be traced back to that. Neither of those would be the case here. So where does their right to that property come from?
Well, that's a very, very good criticism on your part. I think it's very incisive on your side to query that. Before I answer it, I just wanted to say one or two things about Nozick and Rawls and Wilt Chamberlain. You remember the Wilt Chamberlain example? I thought that Nozick just obliterated Rawls.
But I wouldn't necessarily assume that everybody watching or listening is familiar with it. So do you want to just remind us what it is very quickly?
Yeah. Wilt Chamberlain is a great basketball player, and he says, "Hey, everyone, come watch me dunk a basketball," and we all pay him $20, and now he's got 20,000, and he's very rich, and we're very poor. Well, less rich, and he's very rich. And if we want to have some sort of egalitarianism, what we have to do is obliterate that. And then we have to make him give back the money, in which case he's not going to do it in the first place. So if you take the Rawlsian system seriously, says Robert Nozick, who I regard as one of the eminent libertarian philosophers, way up there with Judith, Jarvis, Thomson, and a few other people, well, then we can't have any trade, because every trade leads to some sort of inequality. But we both gain, because when I pay that $20 to watch him, I'm richer because I valued the sight of him dunking the basketball at more than $20. Otherwise, I'm not kicking in 20. And he valued the 200,000 he gets, or the 20,000 he gets, way more than the sweat of dunking a basketball, and he likes it anyway. So there's mutual gain, but the mutual gain would have to be obliterated, and we couldn't have any trade, and we'd all die if we didn't have any trade. So that's one justification. A similar justification goes for 9/10 of the law. Look, suppose it were reversed. Suppose the burden of proof was not on the, look, I want that shirt. I'm sorry, I've been attracted to your shirt. Nothing, no perversion here. I'm not a weirdo. Well, I am in some ways, but not on that shirt. But I want that shirt. Now, right now, the law is possession is 9/10 of the law, and I go to court and I say I want that shirt, and I have to prove something. I have to show a bill of sale, or God knows what I have to show. But suppose it was the other way around, and you had to prove it. And the burden of proof is on you, and you threw away the bill of sale, or your Aunt Tilly bought you the shirt and she threw it away. I could get that shirt. And now you could come back and get the shirt back from me. And I could go to Bill Gates and say, I want that Maserati. And unless Bill Gates has got ironclad, in other words, if we did this, we would be like my criticism of Coase. Coase, well, I don't want to get into Coase because that'll take 5 whole minutes. But if we did this, we'd all die. Why would we all die? Because property rights wouldn't be safe. Anyone could claim anything else, and with the burden of proof on the defendant, and people don't keep. You don't have a record of the bill of sale for that shirt. You don't have a picture, say, of you wearing that shirt. So I would get that shirt, and then you could come back and get the shirt back from me, and somebody else could get the shirt from the two of us. So. Possession of 9/10 of the law and the burden of proof is on the plaintiff is crucially important in legal philosophy, because if you turn it around, you see that we'll all be busy grabbing each other's property and we won't be producing anything, or a lot of people won't be. So that would be my reason.
Okay, so I think we want to separate two separate issues, and I also before I throw it back to you, I do want to go back to Wilt Chamberlain, because I think that's a even more basic issue, but I want to separate out two things, right? One is the burden of proof, and the other one is the moral significance of current possession, right? So I think it's certainly fair to say that yes, obviously we want the we want the burden of we have burden of proof to be on people who want to to disrupt the way that things are right now. That if you claim that I stole something from you, of course, burden of proof should be on you. On that, we completely agree. But I'm not sure how relevant that is to this situation, because if we're talking about a case, and I would argue, I don't know how deep in the weeds we want to go on this. I would argue that that the typical case is maybe a little closer to to the case of the descendant of the slave owner than we'd like to admit, because of course the economic history of the real world is so full of this stuff. I mean, capitalism, even in Europe, emerged from feudalism, and there was certainly no shaking of the Etch-a-Sketch and everybody starting out with equal amounts of property after that. In fact, what you had was brutal enclosure of the land to force people off the land they were living on, to make them get jobs in factories. And that was a walk in the park compared to what happened here in the New World with slavery and dispossession of Native Americans, et cetera. And I think the issue is going to be much broader than the question of whether you can, of whether there's some, individual parcel of land, that has some other rightful owner, because all economic transactions are going to be, again, this is all assuming for the sake of argument that this is what we should care about, whether you can, like, this is what entitles somebody to a given good, whether or not you can trace it back to some just act of original acquisition, which is certainly not my view. But if it was, then I'd be really worried about trying to figure out how to apply it, because all past economic transactions, take place in an environment where, who has the money to lend to who has the money, to win from who in gambling, et cetera, are thoroughly polluted by the extremely non-pristinely libertarian economic history of the real world. But in the example that I gave you, in particular, the slave owner, we're not dealing with the burden of proof question, right? We know that guy has, remember this example, we know that this manor was inherited from somebody who was inherited from somebody who was inherited from somebody who was a slave owner. We know that, right? We just don't have a rightful claimant. So the question is, okay, so we can't redistribute it to a rightful claimant, but if we redistribute it to other things that are important, have we therefore violated the guy's moral rights? Is there some property right that he has to that we are that we are duty bound to respect? And if so, where does it come from? And it doesn't see it. We know it doesn't come from being able to be traced back to a just act of original acquisition, because in this hypothetical, we know that that's not the case, right? We know that it can't be traced back. Remember, we don't have a rightful claimant, but we know how he got it. So again, my question on that was, if this descendant of slave owner has a right to that wealth that's ultimately derived from the slavery, the family fortune from slavery, if he has a right to to not be assessed some sort of tax on his manor that he inherited from his slaving family, where does that right come from? And that's what I was trying to push. Now, I do want to, I know we're being informal about the time, but since I have been timing myself just to make sure, I do want to throw it back to you before I get to the Wilt Chamberlain thing. But I am glad that you brought that up. That's important.
Well, I think, again, you're making a very sophisticated argument against my position, and I appreciate that. But you're trying to twist away from what I said. And what I said was that if we adopt this, that we know that this guy in Mississippi, we know where he got that plantation from the blood, sweat, and tears of Black people 150 years ago. We know that, and I concede that. I mean, it's hardly be a concession. I mean, it's obviously true. But if we then say, well, therefore he should give it up, then we're undermining the possession is 9/10 of the law, and we're undermining the burden of proof argument. And then we get back into what I was saying, that we're going to be busy in court grabbing each other's property, and we'll all die because we won't be producing anything. I once got into an argument with Milton Friedman on this question, and he said, look, land value is only 10% of the GDP. Forget about all that. The problem with the Black people, the problem with Black poverty is their family has been screwed up by welfare. They're unemployed because of minimum wage. The drug law puts them all in jail, or not all in jail, and, forget about it. And I said, well, you're right. As a matter of practicality, reparations aren't that important. If I were the king of the Black people and I wanted to promote Black welfare, I would say, forget about this. It's only 10% of the GDP. Let's worry about the Black family. Let's worry about the drugs. Let's worry about minimum wage laws. But I said to Milton Friedman, but what about justice? And he said, well, the desire for justice will lead to disarray or something. Namely, he didn't understand what justice was. You and I understand what justice is. You and I are closer on this than he and I, and he's a libertarian and you're not. I had one or two other things I wanted to say.
Okay, well, let's at least circle back now, because I do, obviously, just for the record, we have severe disagreements on the empirical question about the causes of the racial wealth gap, but I think that probably goes without saying, but I do, but I'm going to say it anyway. But I don't want to let the Wilt Chamberlain thing get lost, So this is, so if you have a theory, this is not supposed to just be an objection to Rawls, who I sort of gestured at earlier, right, thinking that justice was about fairness. But it's not just supposed to be an objection to the nitty-gritty details of Rawls's theory. It's supposed to be an objection to any theory according to which to decide whether somebody is entitled to a given piece of property, how wealth should be distributed. We should be worrying about the end state. We should be worrying about, whether there's massive inequality. We should be worried about whether there's poverty. We should worry about whether people are dying because their GoFundMe to buy more insulin, wasn't sufficiently funded, which unfortunately happens. That we shouldn't be worried about that, right? What we should be worried about, Nozick thinks, is the origin, right? Where this distribution of wealth comes from. Does it have immaculate origins that we can trace it back to these just acts of original acquisition, like homesteading unclaimed property, or does it come about in some illegitimate way? And so he says, look, if you're Rawls, or if you're somebody who's you have any other theory according to which we should care about the justice of the end state, then let's assume that we start with the end state. Everybody gives a like there's a whatever, everybody gives $20 to Wilt Chamberlain to see him play basketball. Suddenly he's the richest person in the world, and now he says you're supposed to have a problem, because on the one hand, the end state isn't what you want, right? Surely your theory of justice doesn't tell you that Wilt Chamberlain should be the richest person in the world. But on the other hand, where's the injustice? Because it can't be that it wasn't their money to spend however they want, according to your theory. It was, because we started off at the end state that you think is right. So who has a legitimate complaint? Nobody has a legitimate complaint. And what I would say about that is, even sort of bracketing the issue that we've sort of been circling around with all this stuff about reparations and whether possession is good enough to have property rights. I think that so one issue is that I think that the actual origins of economic inequality in the real world, I would argue, bear very little resemblance to the Wilt Chamberlain case. But then the other issue is that I think that, well, somebody could have a legitimate complaint. Like if Wilt Chamberlain makes so much money off of this that we get to a point where he could be 5% of it could be taxed away. And that would save a lot of people's lives through healthcare. That would mean that people got to go to college who wouldn't get to go to college, etc. Then I think the people who don't get to do those things have a legitimate complaint. Now, if they're the ones who gave the $20, then I understand that you could say, well, okay, I mean, they should have thought of that. But if they're the children or the grandchildren of the people who did so, even that doesn't really apply. And I think that they do have a legitimate complaint. And I'd say that as far as, okay, was there anything unjust or objectionable about the giving of the $20? No, but one, Nozick's kind of loading the deck, because he's assuming that the primary question we should be concerned with is how did this come about, which is the issue in dispute. And then two, I'd say that I think that he might be committing what's sometimes called the composition fallacy, which is like, if I say, nobody would actually say this, but it gets the idea across, every molecule that makes up the Brooklyn Bridge is invisible, therefore the Brooklyn Bridge is invisible. Well, just because the individual transactions that bring about some overall distribution of wealth are all individually fine, right? The unobjectionable, doesn't necessarily mean that the resulting distribution of wealth, that's maybe constituted by all of them, is unobjectionable, especially if my theory of justice, my theory of what should happen, is, I mean, whatever, I'll put my cards on the table. I would go further than this, but just to start with, right, that it's not that we should necessarily stop people from engaging in all sorts of economic interactions the other 355 days of the year, but that every April 15th we should take measures to correct that. and to take some of it away, to redistribute to other causes, etc., which isn't going to cause any of the sort of chaos that you're worried about if possession wasn't 9/10 of the law. It's a very it's a very orderly process. It's not disruptive, and so I think that the Wilt Chamberlain example doesn't really disturb my sleep in my continued advocacy of redistribution.
Okay, I'm gonna let you have the last substantive word.
Okay.
I disagree with several things, but the hour is up, and I gotta go.
Okay,
but
fair enough.
I wanted to pay you a compliment. I know that you've had debates with other libertarians. I have had other debates with other lefties or socialists or whatever, progressives, whatever you call yourself. And I wanted to say that this is the most enjoyable one I've ever had, because every other one I've had, they start interrupting me, they start laughing at me. The attitude I get from you is we are fellow buddies. We're trying to get to the truth with a capital T. We're trying to get 1/1,000,000th of an inch closer to it. We're not maybe succeeding, but we're trying. Namely, we're being polite to each other. We're being supportive of each other. My criteria for when I win a debate is not whether I convince the audience. I want to convince you. And if I don't convince you to be a libertarian, I've failed. So I now make a proposition to you, and I'm going to utter a threat against you. I want to do this again, and if you don't have me on your show again, I'm going to steal that shirt. So
okay, all right, fair.
So watch out, boy.
all right, understood. Despite your threats of violence, I will have you back on for sure. I'm not as disconsolate because my ambitions aren't as high as yours. I didn't. My ambition is not to convince you to be a socialist. I imagine that if Bernie couldn't do it, I probably can't. But I will. But I would perhaps, anybody who's watching or listening, who agrees with you, if I can give them any of those second thoughts in the opposite direction of Horowitz's second thoughts, then I'm happy. But who knows? In any case, much appreciated, Professor Walter Block, as libertarian economist and commentator. Is there anything you want to plug before you go?
I don't know. Libertarianism is great.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And I will speak to you again at some point in the future.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
I am now joined by comedian and podcaster Mike Racine, who is the host of The Sit Down, and also crucially, for my purposes, he is one of 3 people who has been joining me for the new series of monthly bonus episodes, recapping The Sopranos, along with Nando Vila and Big Waz. So I thought this would be this would be a fun way to to cap off the episode, maybe switch gears a little bit after the Walter Block debate. So how are you doing today, Mike?
Good. How'd your debate go?
It was fine. It was like after watching the YouTube videos of his debates with Sam Cedar, I was like expecting that to be a lot more. I don't know. I was expecting really a lot more something than it was, but for for whatever reason, it wasn't as intense as
It's
the ones with
intense, yeah.
Sam.
Nice.
But
It'd be funny if he converted you to libertarianism.
yeah. Now we'd spend the second half of the episode just with like me trying to convince you to be a libertarian.
Yeah. And I'm like, say no more.
Yeah. Which is actually that like especially because he's he's not even just like a normal libertarian who says that like we can't we can't have taxes for anything but the police and the military. He's he's an anarcho-capitalist, so he thinks that you should have, I guess, like private police forces to like settle your land disputes or whatever. And then if they like have a disagree with each other about like who has a legitimate claim to what, I'm not quite sure what the procedures are, but I guess it might involve an actual sit down.
Yeah, or it sounds like maybe you just go to war.
Yeah, right. Like I mean, that it seems like either you just go to war, or like somehow like your private police force, like it seems like the range of options would be the same as with the mafia, right? Like if you have a if you have a beef, either you just like end up killing each other, or you do the sit down and try to work something out, or like you try to do that and it doesn't work, and then you go to war for a little while, and you come back. I mean, none of it, like I really enjoy watching that in movies and TV shows. I don't know that I actually want to live like that.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so since since we are doing the Sopranos thing, that might be a fun way to start. So we only did the first the first episode so far. Do the second one in December sometime. But I think one of the reasons I asked you to do that is I get the sense that you're like me and some other people I know, and that like the show aired a long time ago, but like that you're probably enough of an obsessive that you've gone back and like watched it a few times since then.
Yeah, I rewatched it. Well, it's funny because I watched it the first time I watched it, I was probably like 23 years old, and then I rewatched it with my wife recently. So I've only seen the whole show twice, but I watched a lot of clips on YouTube and stuff like that. And it is funny, because when you're 23, your brain's not even really developed. So a lot of it was just me, being like, oh, this lifestyle's really cool,
Yeah.
I guess I didn't make the connection that he's bad. And then my second time watching, I was like, oh, they're trying to say that, because I remember like I made a friend of mine laugh because the scene where Tony beats up Zellman with the belt. I remember being like, man, I was really disappointed in him for doing that. But like, that's kind of the point they're making throughout the whole show.
Yeah, that like literally like everything he does every day is about, using violence to to like shake people down and enrich himself. And, it's like, oh no, that's so disappointing.
Right.
Be like, which is funny. Like a lot of, lots of people whose brains have fully developed, I think are still there to some extent. Like I remember, people who I admire a lot, I remember the late Michael Brooks, there was like we used to talk about The Sopranos all the time. And there was a point where like I brought up, because I thought it was like kind of funny in like a dark, horrible way, right? That the scene where Paulie and Christopher end up killing the waiter because he goes outside and asking why he they didn't leave a bigger tip.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh yeah, I love the show, but like that's like one of the things I almost can't watch. I feel so bad for the guy,
Yeah, that moment in the show for me was like, when I saw that, I turned on those two forever. That was like a lot. That was like too much for me, because I feel like I've been in that situation. I mean, I waited tables for a little bit when I was in my early 20s. But my wife, actually, she was a waitress at Caroline's for about 10 years. So I just understand the plight of that, that job. It's stressful and it's degrading, and you have dreams about it when when you're not there. So I know that moment where you're just almost at your breaking point, and you're like, I'm going to say something, the next person, I'm going to say something. And I feel like that's the moment that guy had. And then he ended up, I hated those two forever after that.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
I guess it was maybe it's kind of funny. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's not like, I mean, obviously the thing itself is horrifying, right? Like,
yeah,
but it's this sense in which I guess
their reactions in there,
I guess is a little bit funny to me in sort of the same way as okay, so the episode I've probably rewatched the most times because it would be like a sort of have friends over and you get drunk and like some point of the night you pop it on, thing for me was the one where the same too, right? Polly and Christopher get lost in the woods. And that original, the way that it all starts, by the way, if you're watching or listening to this and you've never seen The Sopranos, I'm just going to keep doing this.
It's fine.
But
it's not really like a spoiler type show though, I think. I don't know. No. I feel like I knew all the spoilers going into it and I still enjoyed it. Although I kind of wish I didn't know what happened to Adriana because I kind of knew what happened to her.
Yeah.
That was kind of the thing I wish I didn't get spoiled.
Okay, fair enough. And now you have for anybody who's watching or listening.
Well, no, you don't know. I didn't give it away. But okay. Something bad happens to Adriana.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, like the way that situation starts, they're over at the Russian guy's house, collecting the debt, and because while they're walking over there, because the guy's Russian, Paulie just randomly starts talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. He gets himself like mad about the Cuban Missile Crisis, so that's why he picks a fight with the Russian guy and ends up killing him, right? Like sort of the way that like that's funny, I think, like in a much darker way, just like the casual brutality of that this is literally like their only problem with this guy is that when he like came out to confront them about the tip and they told him to fuck off, that like that he didn't just like that, like he stood up for himself a little bit, right? And like that's it, that's enough to kill him.
It makes me nervous to look at because that scene is on YouTube, and it makes me nervous to look at the comments of it, like what people think about that scene. Yeah. Because to me, that scene I think that's the worst moment in the whole series. But I wonder if there's anybody
I mean, it's certainly one of them. Although, I mean, there's also, I think there are individual moments, as Ralphie with his guma, whatever.
That was pretty bad too.
Might have bothered me. Even more than that. I mean, especially because it's not just I guess actually, sorry, maybe I'm just trying to like justify myself because I feel like a sociopath for admitting that I found it like a little bit funny in some way. But I mean, I guess it's just that the way that like it escalates that quickly that they're willing to be like that monstrous about it, combined with the fact that they're just like there's also like it's also almost like slapstick. They just don't know how to handle the situation.
Right.
Oh, what's going on? They got medicine for these fucks with the no, right? Like they're like running away, like they're like the Three Stooges, and they just like bungled the like job painting for the old matron or something, but like with violence. But I guess like all like fun. What you're talking about, that like, oh, you watch it the first time at 23 and it just seems fun, and then and then later like, oh my god, they're half of the show is about them pointing out how terrible these guys are, but it seems like all like depictions of that stuff are all kind of to one extent or another trying to like have their cake and eat it too, like in like Goodfellas, they're like very explicitly the first bunch of the movie is just, hey guys, doesn't this look fun?
Yeah, but it's also fun watching everything kind of fall apart in Goodfellas, and it's like, and then they also do some pretty bad stuff in Goodfellas. I think the biggest contrast is comparing like Goodfellas and Sopranos to The Godfather, because we talked about this last time on the show. I don't know if The Godfather, I don't want to say I don't know if it holds up, but I feel like we've made much better stuff since then, because it's very kind of like, I don't know, the tone of it is very epic and sort of high-handed, and it's very much like it's been a while since I've watched the movie, but it just feels like that depiction of the mafia is not as accurate. Definitely not as accurate as Goodfellas and Sopranos.
In that sense, I think it's definitely like, in that sense, I think Goodfellas and a lot of other things are definitely better. That like Godfather's like a very, like, I think it's an amazing movie, but it's like a very airbrushed like version of the mafia. Although even there, right, like part of the point, like at the at the end of at the end of the movie when Michael is lying to Kay and the doors are closing, like part of the point is okay, but this thing that we've been romanticizing for the last 3 hours is also incredibly evil.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess like the difference between that and something like Goodfellas, much less The Sopranos, is that it's just like grubbier, right? Like even and they're also like maybe sticking in your face a little bit more, like in Goodfellas. The movie actually starts with one of the most like viscerally disturbing like acts of violence in the whole thing.
Yeah.
Where there's the guy in the back, in the trunk of the car, who like they thought was dead and he's still alive, and they have to open it up and stab him a bunch of times. And it's like really disturbing to watch. And then you go straight from there to All My Life I Wanted to Be a Gangster, and this long sequence that like really is just about like, I mean, it still really is romanticizing. It still is about like, man, doesn't this look like fun? Don't you wish you could live like this?
Yeah, it always makes me think like, I wish there was a version of the mafia that just had all the fun parts of it and not the crime and the murder and the extorting people, because like all the elements of it, which is like wearing athleisure clothing, drinking little cups of coffee, drinking little cups of espresso, and like hanging out with your boys in front of a pork store. That is how I envision my life, when I get old. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but that is how I would like to live my older years, because the nice thing about tracksuits is you can be any age, you can be any body type, and they look good on you. You could be 400 pounds, you could be fit, you could be old. We have figured out that part of life, I think.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I think I guess the reasons that you couldn't really like separate out the fun parts of being in the mob are one, if you weren't
cheating on your wife, just like the fun parts.
Yeah, all the fun innocent stuff, that's fine.
Yeah,
right. That's just guys being dudes.
Having a mistress whose apartment you pay for on the other side of town.
Right.
But not ever having to kill anybody.
Yeah, right. Are, I guess, one that like I guess like technically a lot of that stuff, like I mean, a lot of that stuff is just kind of about like having a lot of money, that like you could that if you have like the not having to like have a real job, so you can just hang out all day, you can indulge yourself, all this stuff, like I guess just the money more or less takes care of that.
Yeah.
Although then like the problem is like, then like why are you like randomly like hanging out with why are you randomly hanging out with the boys all all day at the pork store?
No, I'm hoping I can do that when I'm like retired, but who knows? We'll see.
No,
fingers crossed.
Fair enough.
But they all love to complain. They all love to talk about how hard they work. That's another part of it. In the Columbus Day episode, when he's like, "What do we ever get? We didn't have to break our balls for," and they're all just like sitting around eating pastries, eating rainbow cookies.
right. It's like literally what they're doing is, right. They're like sitting in like the back room of the Bada Bing, having like just like shooting the shit or having like, you know, Polly explain like you know, why he you know, why tying your shoelaces is gross, and having everybody making fun of him,
Yeah.
or sitting in front of the pork store, like sitting out at the construction site, like while people are actually working around you.
Yeah.
Which, you know, which is, I mean, it's also like, I guess the other half of it too is that like part of the fun part, you know, is having like everybody be a little bit afraid of you, so you get away with stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny to think about that because, like, I don't know. Do any Italian men work hard? Because my family had a restaurant in Jersey for like 30 years, and my great grandmother and grandmother did all the cooking in the back. I think my great uncle did some cooking too, but I don't know if my grandfather. I don't know what he did. I think. I mean, I don't know. I know he wasn't in the kitchen making food. And then when you meet my dad, when you talk to my dad, I'm like, sometimes I look at my dad, I'm like, I don't know if you've ever done a day of work in your life, you know? So it's a weird culture. It's like Italian culture. It's very like hyper masculine, but a lot of them don't work.
But like also very forgiving of like not actually doing anything.
Yeah. Like my dad, like doesn't really do yard work, doesn't know how to fix anything. You know, I've taught myself how to do all that stuff, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They just get they're so spoiled.
So who did do the yard stuff?
My mother.
Okay. I see.
Yeah. And I guess we did sometimes, but but like I had to move some furniture with my dad recently at my mom's house, and it was you know, he did okay. But I don't think he knew how to carry anything, or, you know.
Well, actually, I mean, I guess on that subject, right? Like I always thought like it was a little bit funny. This is something we didn't talk about in the bonus episode, but in the very first episode of The Sopranos, there's this scene where Tony takes Meadow to like visit this like old church. And he's like, this, you know, my grandfather and his brothers or something like that, right? Like that there's some like
his grandfather, yeah, I think.
Okay, yeah. You know, they built this place, and, you know, Meadow, being, you know, a stupid teenager, says, oh, what, they did it by themselves? He's like, no, they're like a crew of workmen, and, you know, and they didn't design it, but, you know, and I realized that technically, okay, whatever, like, you know, there's some like legitimate skill in like managing that, but also on the face of it, that scene is kind of funny because it's like, okay, so they didn't actually do the work.
Yeah.
Other people did that. They didn't design it, right? Somebody else did that.
Yeah.
But like
they're middlemen.
Yeah, exactly, right. You know, and he was like treating this as the like, oh, these are the people who are like really like, you know, not like, you know, airy fairy contemporary Americans. These were the guys with their hands in the dirt. It's like, yeah, no, they were like, you know, standing there like telling other people what to do.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what he's doing now in his life.
Yeah.
That, you know, that he's not actually, you know, producing anything. He's just like making deals and shaking people down.
Yeah, the show is really like it's very good at critiquing like I guess ideas of masculinity that we have, you know, because you know, you have Tony who's like the boss, but then also like he doesn't really get his hands dirty, and he has other people at his disposal to do stuff for him. And then also he's extremely like petty and vindictive and like very childish. So it's just funny to me that it's funny to me that there's people who would watch the show and be like, Tony Soprano's the man, you know, like a poster of Tony Soprano in their man cave. And be like, he's so right. Cool.
Yeah, like,
you know,
he's literally
he's a baby,
like enormously overweight guy who like spends like 99% of his life sitting down. And when he's sitting down at home, like you usually see him, he's like watching TV or eating, and like and even most of the rest of the time he's just like, you know, sitting there like telling his underlings what to do, or he's sitting at the, you know, the strip club. It's like all he's doing is like making decisions about what other people should do.
Yeah.
And like eating and watching strippers and drinking, and, you know, it's like, so it's like, yeah, no, this is you know, I mean, to put it in the language of the show, right, he's not Gary Cooper.
Yeah, you understand why Phil Leotardo hates him so much. He must just be so disgusted by him. Old school guy who, went to prison.
Yeah, right. He's this like, just this like walking mound of appetites, like
Yeah.
walking around being like easily offended by everything. And, it's like, yeah, no, this is just a piece of shit. But like, then like, because again, when you, and yeah, I mean, I think like probably the same thing, for me, that like when I originally watched it, like, like, even if you kind of know that a lot of that is about like, these guys being scumbags, and like a lot of the humor, is about either them being scumbags or them just like, saying incredibly stupid things, like, when Polly Walnuts, they're talking about the dinosaurs, being wiped out by a meteor. He's like, I thought they was all meat eaters.
Yeah.
So it's like, obviously these guys aren't like models of, anything, right?
Yeah.
But like, but again, it's also that line that because you see them have fun a lot of the time, and because people are afraid of them because of the violence, like on some level that, like that does all seem like, cool. Like, it's like, oh yeah, no, I like to live like that.
Yeah. It makes me think, like, could you make that show in today's political climate? Like, probably not. Could you make a show about bad people that was fun, that was enjoyable to watch? It just feels like, because I could just imagine myself pitching a show like this and people being like, oh, these characters aren't, they're not likable.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. Sometimes I don't see something like this getting that far,
Yeah, no, I wonder, right? Because like there are like even like HBO show now that are like almost entirely like, even not that it's like, belongs in even the same conversation as far as quality, but like Westworld or whatever, they're like primarily about bad people doing bad things. But I think that like, the moralism is probably a little bit more on the nose there, like
more on the nose, and it's like you're not allowed to like them. It's very clear cut of I think with a lot of shows.
No, that's right. Yeah,
who you can like and who you cannot like.
Yeah, no, that seems right. That like that part of what made The Sopranos interesting is that they're like constantly riding this line about like, okay, Tony, Tony is like obviously an evil person. He's in many ways, like we've been talking about, just like a disgusting person.
Yeah. Like I don't think you can make a show. I don't think you can make a show about Donald Trump Jr. nowadays, but he is a very he could potentially be a very fun character, a fun character who's like, who you don't like, but then there's times when you feel bad for him, where you see his hurt, you see his inadequacy. I don't know if you would be able to do that.
Or Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hunter, you could probably get away. I don't know. You could probably get away with.
So the reason you could get away with Hunter, but not Don Jr., that like that Hunter like has moments of like feeling really bad about like the way that he spent his life.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think if you show Don Jr.'s hurt and his inadequacy, that could be very interesting. But I don't know if you'll ever be able to do that now. I'm not sure. Maybe.
Yeah. I watch that. That sounds good. Yeah. Like you could see him like going through life. Like, he's obviously like never had a job that he could like in any way pretend that he got because of him. Right. Like it's just like,
and then his brother-in-law, who's actually evil, gets to be the one to work and make deals, and he just has to like go on Nick DiPaolo's podcast. Like he doesn't even get to have a cool job. Yeah. Jared Kushner's like, step aside, I got this. You're not cutthroat enough, and he's kind of not,
Yeah, he's just like sitting there like posting memes and like doing speaking gigs and stuff. While other people actually get to be close to the levers of power, which would actually also that would have to be a recurrent thing in the show.
Yeah.
That like half of the show would just have to be about his interacting. Well, I mean, it couldn't be half the show because he doesn't interact with his dad that much, but like it would have to be like a recurrent thing that his dad is just like disgusted by him and like his
dad's disgusted by him. Yeah. And all he wants is his father's approval. And then also like all his favorite actors and artists and people that he likes hate his guts now, and they hate his family. And like the celebrities that he gets to hang out with are like Scott Baio and like Chuck Zito and maybe Frank Stallone. You know, he gets to maybe hang out with Frank Stallone, and he's gotta like the lies that he tells himself, you know, the narrative that he spins for himself, and having to confront that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and I think I think that the Don Jr. like the well done Don Jr. show would probably be a lot like The Sopranos, in that like it would be like a lot of humor coming from the fact that, you know, obviously Don Jr. is an idiot, and and also that like there'd be times where you'd be kind of laughing about like his father's complete contempt for him, and you know, and all that stuff. But you'd also like feel like you said, your show is hurt, you know, you'd feel bad for him. You know, he would have moments probably of like almost or sort of realizing it, but then he'd have to come back. Because I was thinking about it as you were saying that, because the obvious, like I think somebody who wanted to like argue the other side of this could say, no, of course they could do this show, because like what about Succession, right? You know, that's you know, like that's about a piece of shit. You know, what's the difference? But I think the difference is that the character, you know, I don't even remember what the names are on the show,
Kendall.
but Kendall, Kendall is that like Kendall is probably like a little bit too like self-aware, that like he probably like as scummy as he acts most of the time, like, you know, that like he has like a little bit more self-awareness. He has a lot of moments of feeling bad about it. Whereas like the Don Jr. thing, I think a lot of what you'd be playing with is that he's never gonna quite come to terms with like how worthless his life is.
Yeah, he'll never take an honest look at it.
Yeah, right. And then right, because, you know, because there has been this like kind of cultural shift. And when I say that, like I want to be like really like specific, because like this is not like, you know, just like a pure like whatever, like stupid kids PC, you know, whatever. Like I think there's like a more specific thing you could say here, right? Which is that like even pretty recently, like way after like the Sopranos you know, started in the early 2010s, it seems like there was all this pop culture that was like very much about like the creators like wrestling with their own demons and like being like, oh, I'm kind of a piece of shit, here's some interesting art about it. Like Louis, right? Like that would, you know, I mean, that was definitely a product of that, and people were still, you know, into that, and now like or like, you know, whatever, like Girls in a different way, right? You know, like that's definitely, you know, like Lena Dunham, you know, like having like playing with like, you know, I mean, that's like, I mean, to the extent that it's like kind of autobiographical, it's like not a good depiction, right? You know, like you know, and people liked that, but I think now like the culture as a whole is like, you know, like taken like a much more like moralistic turn that like that I mean, like I don't think you could, like, never mind the Sopranos, like I don't think you can make Louis in 2020,
right?
Like, even apart from what, you know, Louis C.K. personally.
And it's just such a weird thing too, because it almost feels like people feel like they have to do that. They have to take this, because we all kind of feel so powerless over the past 4 years. We felt like, I don't know, maybe we let this happen, and we see this horrible stuff that's happening every day, and it's tougher to it's almost like people, there's this desperation, and there's people feeling they have to do something. But then it's also celebrities who haven't thought of themselves, anything but themselves, in the past 10 years. And I thought that Sarah Cooper special on Netflix was kind of indicative of that, because it's like, it's the whole through line of the special is kind of, you know, her being like, oh, this is I'm so scared, but there's just a lot of celebrities in it, because I guess all the celebrities hate Trump too. But it doesn't really talk about any, there aren't any solutions or any kind of like, not that that's what a comedian has to do, but you can't just be freaked out, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, right. Like, and you can't, like it seems like the big difference is that you have to be like much more like explicit about like what you're like, what you're supposed to think, right? Like not necessarily, like you said, in terms of solutions, but like in terms of like who you're rooting for, who you're rooting against, who's good, who's bad, like I think that's the that's the difference. Like the worst version of it is that kind of that kind of comedy that's like seems less designed to get people to laugh than to get people to just to like clap along. So, oh no, that's right. No, you tell them, right? That's good. Which which is just which is just insufferable. Which, and by the way, right, like so is the shit that's reacting to that. Like the people who like the people who do like incredibly lazy specials that are like 97% devoted to like, God damn it, why can't I tell a joke?
Yeah. Or when you said the other side, I thought you meant people who go far, like people who are sort of being offensive for offensive sake.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the same thing, right? Like, because I think a lot of the there's a sort of way of doing comedy that's like, you sort of do the why can't I tell a joke grumbling, and then you're just like, hey, what about this, right? And you just sort of say something offensive, but there's like no actual joke there really, but it's like, oh, like you snowflakes are probably triggered by this, aren't you? And it's like, no, this is just like anti-woke clapter. It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So really, actually, I guess before before we wrap up, just I did want to go back to to earlier, because you're talking about The Godfather, and you're talking about Goodfellas. Do you watch Mean Streets?
It's funny. I've tried to watch that movie like twice, and I couldn't. Okay. I don't know. I just didn't have a desire. But I watched it, maybe like 6 years ago, and then maybe like 14 years ago. So okay. I don't know. I guess I would watch it. I guess I'd watch. I'll try watching it again.
Yeah.
Be like, what am
I? Well, I mean, like I think that's just in terms of what you were saying about Goodfellas and The Godfather, right? Because like part of the difference is that The Godfather is portraying like this like really romanticized version of like the very, very top levels of organized crime. Yeah. And Goodfellas is like, like these guys are like, middle management at best.
Right.
Nobody's even a made guy, in the movie, and like, well, whatever. I guess I've given away enough things about enough movies today, but but then like Mean Streets, if you ever do watch it, it's like a little bit like, I think it's like one step further in that progression, even though it came out earlier, because it's about people who are like these super low level enforcers who are sometimes shaken down by corrupt cops. There's a scene where there's like a 5-minute like brawl because somebody calls somebody else a mook, and the beginning of the like the beginning of the fight is, hey, what's a mook? You can't call me a mook. So it definitely like takes that takes that a step further. I mean, I guess I'm just trying to think like
I guess these movies were interesting because it seems like the mafia was such a pervasive part of American culture. Like even now you're making me think of that movie, The Pope of Greenwich Village, with Mickey Rourke and Eric Roberts, which like to me that movie is very silly because it's sort of like that same aesthetic, but Mickey Rourke is supposed to be like a guy that's really cool and he's a restaurant manager. It's just, I guess that's Boomer's idea of, because it came out in the 80s, right? So that was like, that's like Boomer's idea of being cool. You manage a restaurant, you wear a suit, and you listen to Sinatra. and now you have a painting of Robert De Niro in your basement, but you did smash it when he insulted Trump at the Tonys. You smashed it and set it on fire.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I guess then I guess
Just you watch this stuff and you go, oh, this was never that cool. So who am I? What am I supposed to do here? You know, it's like you have to like redefine. You have to redefine what being a man is and what being cool is.
Yeah, right. I mean, of course, actually being cool would be Ace Rothstein and running a casino and like doing a public access TV show about it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just having a podcast now.
So
with a nice
we all
Patreon.
Get to be exactly that.
We all get to be. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I think gonna wrap this up on that. Is there anything you want to plug before you go?
Yeah, I got a podcast, The Sit Down, comes out every Wednesday, and then you can follow me on Instagram at Recine Mike, and then Twitter, Mike.Recine. I'm not doing as much stand-up nowadays, but every once in a while I'll be on a show in the city that I'll promote on Instagram or Twitter.
Okay. And you've still been able to do that like this year?
Oh yeah, a little bit. There's these like outdoor shows and some people do them and sometimes they're good. And I mean, just like all shows, sometimes they're good. Yeah, sometimes they're, it's cold out or it's raining or whatever. And, but now like COVID numbers are spiking. So this whole year has been for comics, it's been very like up in the air. It's been very, what do we do? Do we like focus more on the podcast or do video content or go to Prospect Park to perform for 2 people in the freezing cold?
Right. Jesus.
Yeah.
Well,
not that it was good before that, but it's worse. Yeah. It's worse now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. So you can see the first of the Sopranos bonus episodes on YouTube. It's also on the podcast feed. Talked about episode 1. Wanted to get Mike on the main show for a few reasons. One of which is it seemed a little unfair. Now Noah and Waz have both been on, so everybody who's doing that should also be on the regular show. But going to do episode 2 sometime in December, and then either eventually we're going to get sick of it, or else we're going to wrap up the series in like the early 2030s sometime.
I'm having a good time. I like it. I think it's fun.
Yeah, me too. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. Take care.
You too. All right. That was the comedian and podcaster, Mike Racine. He is the host of a podcast called The Sit Down, which you should listen to. I do. He has also been coming on this show for monthly bonus episodes to recap The Sopranos. Again, I thought that would be a fun thing to do after the debate earlier. A little balance for the show. Do some philosophical arguments in the first half, and then while we all recover, as friend of the podcast Dave Rubin would say, from the high level ideas, can chat with Mike a little bit about comedy and The Sopranos and gangster movies. But coming up next week, I'm going to have current affairs in-house economist Rob Larson and historians Matt Karp and Alex Gurevich, and we're going to be talking about capitalism and unfreedom and something called the Republican idea of liberty, which was very important in the movement against slavery and in early organized labor efforts that Alex Gurevich talks about, like the Knights of Labor, and Rob Larson's book, Capitalism and Freedom, the Toll Road to Serfdom, kind of brings that up to the present day and socialist critiques of contemporary capitalism. The week after, I'm very excited to say we are going to have Amber Frost from Chapo talking about her article in Catalyst magazine about hashtag activism, and also Natalie Wynn, who you may know as ContraPoints. And the week after that, the great Anna Kasparian is going to be back on the podcast. I thought she was going to be on this week. There's a little scheduling mix-up, but she is going to be on there. There's going to be a lot of other good content coming up. I hope that you're watching the YouTube channel, that you subscribe to that, because in between these episodes, I've been doing, I don't know if I'm going to keep up this pace, but I've been doing like 3 or 4 live streams on the YouTube channel every week. So I did one this last week with the historian Daniel Bessner about fascism and how it works historically, and the debate about whether there's some sense in which the Trump wing of the GOP is fascist. I did one with Peter Coffin and Angie Speaks from the Low Society podcast. I also usually do at least one that's just a solo live stream, usually midweek, take some super chat questions, just kind of hang out with the audience a little bit. Speaking of the audience, if you possibly can, please do consider joining the Patreon. So that's patreon.com/Ben Burgis. For $5 a month, you get early access to every single episode. You get regularly scheduled Discord office hours, group voice chats. You get access to that Discord server, and I've been trying to work on some bonus content for you guys. I did do a bonus episode with Jesse Single, but then I accidentally deleted the recording. So now I neurotically record everything like Nixon recording visitors to the White House. But we're going to re-record the conversation with Jesse. We're going to do some other good bonus content for patrons coming up. And most of all, again, if you it's not a subscription service, it's solidarity and support. If you like the work we're doing here, and I do say we, because there are other people behind the scenes who do editing, who do promotional stuff. And like I keep saying, I'd really like to be in a position where everybody who did anything for this podcast made a living wage out of doing that. So if that is within your means, to get that $5 a month, really appreciate the support. Please do that. Even if not, please, I understand. Please do like and subscribe on YouTube. Please do rate and review wherever you're listening to this as a podcast. Those things really do help, and really do appreciate the support. So see you guys next week with Matt Karp, Alex Gurovich, and Rob Larson. Left is best.